Hey everyone, and welcome back to our Snare Drum Mastery series here. We are on lesson 2 now and ready to learn some new materials and some new concepts. So let's get going here. First thing off is we're going to be covering our outline here and just kind of briefly going over the things that we're going to cover in lesson 2. Lesson 2's got a lot of important concepts to go over. The first one is that we want to start by looking at our fundamental drum rudiments. And the first one will be the single stroke roll. The single stroke roll arguably is the most common roll and sticking pattern used in contemporary music today. There are other rolls, of course, and other stickings, but the reason why the single stroke is so popular is because it's so easy to do. I mean, it's simply at its core an alternation of your hands, basically just right, left, or left, right. So pretty easy to figure out. You just alternate your hands, and by doing that, you can get a lot of drum fills and a lot of different patterns. I mean, technically, if you wanted to, you could use the single stroke for every single thing you did. That may or may not be the most effective way to do it, but it's definitely one way to do it. And single stroke is definitely one roll that you're going to want to put a lot of time and effort into developing. Control, speed, also using left and right hand leading. That just means starting with the right hand or starting with the left hand. And you want to definitely be able to apply it not only on the snare drum, but once you get to the drum set and get comfortable with playing drums, you want to be able to play it all around the drum set and in all different kinds of ways and contexts. So we'll be covering that a little bit more, especially during the actual demos where we demonstrate the roll. But just a couple of quick tips before we move on about the single stroke roll and practicing it. Again, I'm going to say this probably 100 times during this course, but you definitely want to use a metronome when you're practicing any of these rolls, and of course the single stroke roll would be no exception. I would also recommend practicing at different speeds. In our outline, you can see that I recommend starting about 65 beats per minute and moving up in intervals of 10 until you can reach at least 125. 125 is certainly not the fastest you should probably attempt to master, but it's a good starting point. 125 will get you a long ways. Most average kind of music, if you can play up to 125, that'll give you a good range. Obviously, if you're playing certain styles, you probably need to be able to play faster than that. But like I said, this is just for practice tips and things like that. So, and like I said, we'll be covering a little bit more of that as we move into our demos. But for now, we'll just keep on moving to our next topic, which is the eighth note. In lesson 1, we looked at the whole half and quarter note. So in lesson 2, we need to add the eighth note as a note to use in our drumming, and we will definitely use eighth notes a lot. But real quick, let's just kind of review how the eighth note plays out in the context of the other notes. So if you remember from lesson 1, you've got our whole note here. If you divide a whole note, you get 2 half notes. If you divide the half notes, you get 2 quarter notes for each half note, which equals a total of 4 quarter notes. And then where we're at in lesson 2 is when we further subdivide the quarter notes, we get eighth notes. Or eighth. All right, so when we get to our reading exercises, it will definitely help you see this a lot better. But for now, go ahead and explain how that you talk about these things and how that you read them and how you count them, more importantly, because that's what we need to learn how to do. So, again, we're in context of 4. We always want to, well, not always, but we want to, for at least the first few lessons, we're going to be playing in 4/4 time. If you need explanation on how that works, you just go back to lesson 1 where we cover that a lot. So, the eighth notes, obviously, let's start with kind of identifying where we're at here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got 4 sets of them. The quarter notes, obviously 2 and 4/4 time would have 1, 2, 3, and 4. But we've divided that in 2, remember, so we can't just count them 1, 2, 3, 4. We have to have something else to help us when we're dealing with the eighth notes. So for the eighth notes, you would have 1 and you say it and count it as and that would be symbolized by a plus sign here when you're writing the counts out by hand. So you have 1 and, 2 and, 3 and, 4 and. And as you can see, by continuing to further subdivide the notes within the same time constraint, beats per minute, things like that, we actually end up with more notes, which gives us more options to create music and to be creative. So there's the eighth note. Again, counted as and, written as a plus sign when you're writing it out by hand. And also don't forget our friendly little eighth rest as well. Going back to lesson 1, remember our eighth note, when we get to our reading exercises, is going to have a little stem on there, and then the eighth note rest would look like this right here. So you're going to be seeing those a lot coming up in our reading exercises. All right, so before we get into our reading exercises, we're going to have 3 of them in this lesson. We're going to have some eighth notes demos. We're going to have some eighth notes as well as whole, half, and quarter notes. Just more practice on applying those. And we're going to have some eighth notes in conjunction with just quarter notes. So in the next segment, we'll go over those reading exercises and get the counts written out on those so we know exactly what we need to play.